So before we get started on this episode, just a fair warning, the Flatiron Building has struck again, and this time borderline haunted. We had all kinds of weird issues. Unfortunately, our wonderful interviewee, Alexa, her mic seems to have been picking up radio signals for some reason in a way that we could not figure out. The conference table that we were recording on appears to have been essentially a drum that massively magnified all movements and any noise of, for instance, putting a cup down on the table, in addition to the normal city noises of sirens and traffic downstairs. And yeah, so it was a virtual cornucopia of fun time, distracting noises. I did my best to clean it up, and I apologize for any moments where you're wondering, is that a faint FM radio signal in the background? Yes, it is. You're not crazy. That said, I think our conversation with Alexa was really interesting. We talked about all kinds of really cool stuff, so bear with us, and I hope that you enjoy the episode. This is Graphic Novel TK, your podcast guide to comic book publishing.
Hello, and welcome to Graphic Novel TK. I'm Gina Gagliano.
And I'm Allison Wilgus.
We're so excited to talk to you about how actual books get made today, i.e. production. And by how books get made, I don't mean people write them and draw them. I mean, how do they get printed and produced? Like, how does the paper exist and get bound in between the two covers? We're excited to have Alexa Villanueva, who's a senior production manager at Macmillan Children's, with us today to talk about that. Alexa, can you tell us a little about who you are, how you got into comics, and what you're doing now?
Sure. My name is Alexa Villanueva, and I work on children's books, graphic novels. I've been in production for about 17 years. Prior to that, in magazine publishing. So I've worked on all kinds of printing, or worked with all kinds of printing. Specifically, the graphic novel imprint has grown so much that I'm working less and less on children's books. So I'm really happy about that. I really like the books I'm working on.
Yay, comics.
Yes. And I stumbled on the comics because when I came to Macmillan, it was a position to work on children's books, but there was for second, that was a pretty new imprint, and the role required that I work on graphic novels along with picture books. And as the list grew, I got pushed away from the picture books and more into the graphic novels, and it's been a wonderful learning experience. Prior to that, my knowledge of comic books was Archie comics. I grew up reading Archie comics, and this was a new thing. And as I was working on these books and reading the proofs, I started reading the stories and saying, this stuff is pretty good. And I really enjoy working on them, reading them, and it's been a great experience.
That's awesome. So you have the job of a production manager, and that job, I feel, is a very behind-the-scenes job in comics, shrouded in mystery. What do you actually do? Like, what does a typical day for you look like, and what are kind of the main responsibilities of a production manager?
In production, we're keeping costs down. A lot of it is about keeping the books as inexpensive as possible to manufacture. That includes getting the files out for printing. So we want to make sure that the files are correct for the printer so that when they get the job, there aren't any issues on press.
You also do quotes, you arrange the whole printing experience.
Exactly, yes. So there is pricing, there's scheduling, there's a lot of relationships because I'm representing our company to the printer, but I'm also representing the printer to the design and editorial team. And there is just, you want to have everyone in harmony so that everyone works well together.
So it's like a diplomacy aspect of this.
Exactly. And so there are a lot of roles. It's really keep making the book look as beautiful as possible, keeping the cost down while doing that. having a good working relationship with the designers, the editors, other departments in the publishing company, and making sure that I'm getting the correct files to the printer so that they can do their job and produce a beautiful book for us.
So what's the first time that you would hear about a book? When a publisher is like, okay, we're going to acquire this book, we think it's amazing. Are you hearing about the book at that point? When do you get involved?
Generally, we're usually working 3 to 4 lists out, and we get requests from the editor to price out a book. It happens in various stages. Sometimes it's when the editor's acquiring a book. Sometimes
that the editor can be like, if I am interested in doing a 200-page chapter book, what is the least that I would be able to pay for this so that I know what sort of advance and what sort of royalties to give the author, right?
So
exactly.
They're putting the P&L together, like you're part of that process.
Well, and sometimes I think we're just acquiring or competing for a particular title. There are times that there's a title that's up for bid, and we're trying to see, can we afford this book, and exactly how much of a royalty can we give the author illustrator.
And knowing how much the book costs to make is a very important part of that.
Exactly. I think a lot of times the manufacturing of a book is probably the least amount that's going out, because there are so many different things that need to be paid in order to acquire a book.
Like colorists or letterers, or obviously if there's an author, an illustrator,
Exactly.
Maybe there's a freelance editor or a freelance designer who's laying everything out.
If a book is a very high page count, we also have to factor in prep costs.
Yeah.
Most of the graphic novels are for color, and we have to prep those files. That can be very expensive, and the higher the page count, the more money we're going to pay. Sometimes that's $10,000, $12,000 right there. So that's a huge amount of money that needs to be considered upfront.
Yeah, and it's important to know, is this book going to be prohibitively expensive to produce if, for example, it's like 3 feet tall or, 500 pages long? Perhaps you need to adjust the advance or the royalties one way or another so you're able to publish it and then make a profit for the company, but also for the author for it.
So, that's the other thing. So you're obviously following this book through its whole life.
Yes.
What are the stages that you're coming, what are the parts where you're most involved in? Where are you coming into this process?
Yeah. So what happens after that acquisitions point?
So after that acquisition, I've gone out and bid the job with generally 3 printers so that I know that I'm getting the best price. And I present that price back to the editor, who then presents it to the publisher. They acquire the book, and we will work out a schedule. Once it's put on a list, whether it be spring, fall, or winter, from there we make a schedule. I work with managing ed to provide a date where I will need the mechanicals. At that point, when I say mechanicals, because that sounds like a mysterious word, everything's been written, laid out by design. It has gone through managing editorial. It's gone through
copy editing,
through any kind of sensitivity reads. That has all happened. And at that point, I am getting lasers and files for what is very likely going to be close to the finished book. I get those mechanicals, I send those out. We see a round of proofs that are color accurate. And at that point, we hope that there will be minimal changes, but we generally go through about 3 rounds. And not a full sets, but we'll find a couple of things that need tweaking. We will look at those files, we'll make those changes. Believe it or not, that process is usually about 3 months. So it does take some time for everybody to look at it, for the corrections to be made. Once those files are approved, we send them off to the printer.
So are they shipping you physical files that you're reviewing? Are the kinds of changes that you're talking about, like this is printing too dark or this paper stock isn't looking the way? What kinds of things are you looking out for when you're getting proofs, for instance, back?
Yes, definitely color. So I'm making sure that things don't look too dark, too light. We want to make sure that the paper is what we want it to be. If by chance there happen to be a lot of white areas in the art, we want to make sure that the opacity is good with the paper so that you don't see from one side to the next. We're looking at things like registration, making sure that the 4-color plates are hitting correctly so that things don't look blurry or bitmap, that the type is nice and straight looking and not fuzzy. So there are a variety of different things that we're looking for at that time. On the cover, on the effects, we want to make sure that the gloss and the embossing is lining up correctly. Big production thing is checking the spine, making sure that that spine is going to be perfect, that everything's centered.
That it's the right width.
That it's the right width, that where the folds are on the cover and the case, that nothing is going to fall off that really should be on the front.
Yeah, and that's a big thing for hardcover books, right? Because if you look at a hardcover book, there's this space in the spine where the binding kind of comes in, and that's not necessarily something that an author will be thinking about when they're putting their type or their graphic together. But then you get the proofs and you're like, oh wait, here's the line where the spine goes in, and it has obscured part of the title or my name or the artwork that was essential.
Right. You want everything to be centered. Obviously, you don't want anything to fall into the hinge. I think that's the area that you're talking about. And
excellent vocabulary word.
Yes. So I do get templates for the designers to make sure that everything is as it should be, the correct size, the correct spine. Nothing will fall into the hinge because that can be an issue. We cannot laminate the hinge. We don't want things to crack within the hinge when they bind it. So those are things that we do look for.
And how often are you finding these kinds of problems? Like, does basically every book have something about it that comes up kind of fucked up when you get the first round back? Or do most books, it just depend on the printer? Like, how common are these kinds of problems?
They're pretty common.
It's like every book. Every book has something wrong with it.
A big issue that we come across is 4-color black text. So basically, it's black and it's small and it's thin. We want it to appear black, but there are 4 plates that are together to make that black, and because they're so small and thin, if they don't line up just so, that's going to look bad. It's going to look like bad printing. It's going to look like we provided bad files. So that does come up pretty regularly, and our prep house will alert us of those issues. We have great designers here. We have Andrew Arnold and Molly Johansson, and they're super careful. But things do happen. Sometimes we work with so many outside designers, so many illustrators. Everyone works their own way. So we do encounter problems, but we tackle them early on.
So you're getting given the mechanical, like, I designer basically sending this giant Dropbox folder to you. Do you have like a checklist that you go through when you get things that you're literally like, okay, here's common problems that people miss, or are you just sort of...
When I'm getting them out, right, at that point, I'm really just checking the spine and the sizes. I want to make sure that things are the trim size that we agreed on, they're the page count that we agreed on, because if I get something and the page count is off, I know my spine's going to be wrong, and we're going to have that adjusted, which can sometimes be time consuming because at that point, the layers have been created. If there's a spot gloss, if there's an embossing, now those files will need to be adjusted as well. So it's not just this one file. It's all the layers that go along with it.
And that's introducing an opportunity for things to get fucked up, because what if you don't change all the layers? Yeah.
Exactly. We do not want that.
And also your printer is going to be like, you said this book was 208 pages and it's actually 224. We didn't purchase the paper and set aside it for you, that extra signature.
At that point, we've usually cut a purchase order. So at the end, after we've looked at our proofs and we've approved them, I send the files to the printer, I send them in order, that confirms all the specs. At that point, I really should know the page count. If I don't, that's a big problem. But the page count is set, and the printers are really good about alerting us of any discrepancies from what we've quoted to what we now have. And so that's less of an issue, but what does happen when page counts go up, and we can't always change that, or it is what it is that we at that point have already estimated the job, and let's say it's $19.99 and it's 208 pages. It looks pretty good at that moment. But if the page count goes up a couple of signatures, now we're paying more for a book and we're still charging the same price. So our profit goes down.
Yeah. So you mentioned a prep house when you were talking about this whole process. Can you tell us a little about what that is?
Sure.
It's different from a printer.
It is different from the printer. So there are companies that we provide the files to them. We provide application files, mostly InDesign, Illustrator, whatever file we're working in. And they will take those files, make sure that all the fonts are loaded, make sure that the images are high resolution, make sure that everything is ready for printing purposes. And they will make sure that those jobs are specifically set up for the printer they're going to. When I release a job, I let the prep house know this is going to this particular printer. They all have different profile settings. They all work more or less the same, but there are specific needs for each particular printer. So the prep house is getting our files ready for that particular printer so that there are no concerns once we go to press. They also provide the proofs that are color accurate, so that gives us an opportunity to see whether we're happy with the color or not.
So how is an author involved in this process? Is this something that happens mostly internally where the design and the editorial team are looking at things, or do authors get a chance to look at the proofs at this stage too?
Yeah, like are you typically emailing with authors or more just like...
I'm really not. Generally, I'm dealing with mostly design. I work with everyone here, but it's really design. I speak to the art director and the designer on the phone probably like 5 times a day each, just because we're constantly communicating about whatever needs to be done. There's so many titles fast moving. I generally don't meet with the author or the illustrator unless there's a concern. If there is a concern, then we may talk about color, we may meet in the color room, we may email, and I will contact the printer or the prep house for any things that are really technical. These files can get very technical beyond my knowledge, and we communicate that way. But it's generally not the author or illustrator unless it's a concern.
Yeah. But is the editorial or design team communicating about these proofs with the author during this process?
Yes, they are. So we get 7 sets of proofs, and they're used for various purposes. We generally have one set of proofs that routes internally. We have one for the author illustrator if they're 2 different people. The editor gets one. Our publicity person will get one. And we have 2 that we use for sales purposes.
Now, who are you talking to on the printer side? You were talking about how like you were kind of in between the printer and the publisher. Who on the printer side is it that you're in touch with?
And how do you meet printers?
Okay, well, our printers domestically will have sales reps that will come in and visit. We generally don't print in the U.S. because it is expensive unless it's a book that has taken off and that we know we have the budget to print domestically, or that we just need the book so quickly that we don't have the time.
Or if it's black and white.
Or if it's black and white, that's right. Generally, we do our first prints in China, and the Chinese companies will have a U.S. representative. And all the 3 that we use, the 3 that I typically use, do have sales reps that come and visit every couple of weeks. They'll ask how things are going. At that point, we can discuss if there are any concerns. We can talk pricing, schedule. So they do have a presence here in the U.S. as well. And I email with the people in China every day. And there is a time difference, but we've managed to figure that out just fine. I will email during the day. I know that the next day I'm going to have a response, and we just build that into the schedule. We know it's going to take a little bit longer. We know that the shipping time is 7 weeks. So we build that into the schedule, and so far it works.
Are you also responsible for dealing with like the physical movement of the books, or you just purely like once the books have been printed and they are objects, they are no longer my concern? That's somebody else's job to like actually track them making their way here.
Well, what we do is we have a company that we have a contract with, and we let our printers know this is who you need to contact. We do get bills of lading, which let us know when the books have left the port. We know the vessel that they're sailing on and the expected date that they're going to arrive in the United States. Once they
And
arrive,
you're planning for that. You're like,
yes.
I need the books in the U.S. by January, so I have to send them to the printer, the final mechs from the prep house by October, September.
Typically, we need 5 months from when we have mechanicals released to the prep house until we have a bound book. That's when they're ready to leave China. Then from there, we allow another about 12 weeks before the books are on sale, because we have 7 weeks that they're going to be on the water.
And things happen.
Things happen. We want to make sure that once they hit the United States, that they've cleared customs.
And also there's exciting things like
shipping companies going out of business with your book sitting on the boat.
Or I've talked to people who the boat sinks. And then your
That's
book,
what insurance is for, but still.
yes,
Jesus.
then your
Or
books
held
that you thought
hostage.
were,
Didn't that happen last year? There were like books that were being held at sea and they weren't released. And who could possibly plan for that?
no. But I mean, sometimes you have more normal things like hurricane season, which can delay the boat by a week or two because it doesn't want to sail through a hurricane.
Yeah, this is the part of the interview that I like to think of as the, yes, there's a reason why you had to turn those files in so far in advance, part of the interview that we return to from time to time. Because that's the number one frustration that I deal with people who are used to doing.
Like pamphlet comics.
Yeah, or webcomics or whatever, is the whole like, no, but seriously, my book isn't coming out till like next year. Why is everybody stressing out that I'm not done yet? I'm like, well.
Yeah, and it's like the people on customs could be overloaded with boats that week, and then it took them an extra week to clear this boat through customs, and we didn't want your book to be late, so we built some time in the schedule in case that happened.
Yeah, there was a dock worker strike at one point, and we had to redirect some of the vessels. So things like that will happen.
Is there like an equivalent of me obsessively tracking like my FedEx thing? Like, can you like, do you have GPS where you're like watching the boat move here from time to time in moments of anxiety, or is that out of your control?
Apparently, we have a new freight forwarder that we've just started using in like maybe the last 2 months. And there is a website where the printer is supposed to enter the information of when the books have shipped, and we can not track it on the water, sort of like when you're flying in the plane, but you can get a pretty good idea of when the books are going to hit the warehouse. There are still a couple of glitches. Once that's up and running, it's going to be an excellent tool.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So a freight forwarder, for our audience who may not be in the know with all of these exciting production terms.
I don't actually know what a freight forwarder is either.
So they're a logistics company, and basically they handle shipping of anything. And the one that we're using now, they have offices in Hong Kong and throughout China, and our printers will contact them. The printer is responsible for getting them to the dock, getting them to the port. At that point, these companies will make sure that the books are loaded onto a vessel. That boat sails. It arrives. Most of our books come into the Virginia port. And at that point, that company is still responsible for making sure that those books get off of that boat. They have to clear customs. They have to make it onto a truck in the United States, and that truck needs to deliver to our warehouse.
So they're like escorting your books across the world, basically.
Exactly. So they are following that from port all the way to the warehouse.
You may not know the answer to this, but I'm just curious now. So when the printer is dropping it off at port, like, what are they dropping off? They're dropping off pallets?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's not just like, here's 10 boxes of this book.
Well,
it's like,
I'm like, they don't have like containers level. They're like pallet level, right?
The containers happen at the port.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
So no. I mean, it's a good question. They're wrapped up in pallets and they're delivered to the port. And then the more that we have on a vessel is actually more economical, because if we just have a couple of things, that might just be a partial container. If we can fill up a container, then we're saving money.
so you don't necessarily have a ship that's entirely for
No.
second graphic novels.
That would be great.
It's instead a ship that might be filled with like fruits and vegetables and
Exactly.
also graphic novels.
Exactly. Yeah, there's all sorts of things going there. But our printers do try to consolidate. If I have a book and another production manager has several books that are shipping very close in that same week, they do consolidate.
And is there anything you do with the packaging to make sure that the books don't get damaged in the 12 weeks that they're moving around the country in different trucks and being put into containers and taken out of containers and put in other trucks? And
Right. The printers are very careful. I mean, they do carton them very carefully. We use double wall cartons because they are heavy. There is a weight limit. I believe it's 35 to 40 pounds. They can't pack beyond that, and that determines our carton quantity. So they make sure that they're not too heavy, and they do use the double wall cartons so that the books are protected. Many of our printers will actually slip sheet between the books.
and that's just putting like a tissue papery sort of sheet between the two volumes.
Yes.
And that's so, if I'm getting this right, the ink doesn't smudge.
Yes, sometimes we'll request it, and it can
Yeah.
be for that purpose. Now, there are air advances, which are some of the ones that you've typically seen that are wrapped in bubble wrap, and they
Yeah.
have shrink wrap.
And those are like put on a plane instead.
Those are put on a plane, and there are advances, so they're extra careful with those because they know they're going to be thrown around. That won't happen so much with the ones that go to the warehouse.
Yeah.
They're packed very tightly. There's
They're all like shrink wrapped within an inch of their life to that pallet, right?
it's pretty tight. But even within the carton, if they need to add any kind of cardboard so that everything is just super tight and not going to shift around and corners aren't going to bend and scuff.
So that reminds me of something I've actually genuinely been wondering about. So, like, there's a lot of reasons why having your trim size for your book not be what you thought it was going, like from your perspective, having books trim size change. Is one of those reasons like how many books can physically go into a box? Like, is that part of your concern? Like, if you're doing a non-standard trim size, it messes up this process of people have to put these books into boxes, or is that not something you worry about?
It's probably a later concern. It's not a concern right away. A lot of times the trim size is determined by Barnes & Noble because it's what size they can fit on their shelves. So many times that is why we use standard trim sizes. From a production point of view, there are trim sizes that are more economical. I have 3 vendors that I use, and the 6 by 8.5 trim size, which is what First Second typically uses, is very economical for one particular printer because of the web presses that they have. So there are different factors that determine what is going to make a book most economical. How many books you fit in a carton does make a difference. Like right now I did a slipcase. The slipcase, you can only fit like 6 slipcases in a box in the carton that meets the standards for the size boxes, cartons that the warehouse wants and the weight. So you're using a lot of cartons. If you have a 10,000 copy order and you can only fit 8 per carton, that's a lot of cartons. So you're going to spend money there.
And does that impact the cover price for that, or is that more just something you have to eat on your end?
It really is because by the time we realize how many can go in a carton, it's factored into the price. When we get a price from China and we give them all the specs and they give us an estimate back, that cost is included. I don't know how much that really affects, like, I don't think an editor is going to change their trim size necessarily because of how many fit in the box. But we do have standard trim sizes here at Macmillan that we try to adhere to, and we should adhere to because it saves money. And we're very sensitive and mindful of just our carbon footprint. So we want to pack as many per carton as possible.
And it also helps with paper buying, right? So when you think about what paper to use for a book, there's some different factors that go into that. And one of them is like if you're using a standard paper stock at a company, you can at the beginning of a year or beginning of a season be kind of like, okay, we want this many rolls of paper, and be able to get a lower cost for that than if you just use a single paper stock for one specific book and then had to buy a different roll for another book and then a different roll with a different texture for another book.
We schedule our books probably about 7 to 8 months in advance with the printers. At that point, we are telling them what paper we're going to be using. We typically have a coated paper or an uncoated paper. I know that doesn't sound like a lot of choice, but it's what we use. And if we want something beyond that, we have standard weights as well. And something usually works perfectly for whatever we're going to do. At that point, when we place that order with the vendor, they have an idea based on what we've estimated what the quantity is going to be. They can pre-order that paper. There have been shortages of paper in the last year or two. Prices have skyrocketed for paper, particularly in China. So one vendor that I use will generally say early on, how much? What do you think your quantity is going to be? Is it going to be a high quantity? And they will reserve that paper at that cost at that time, even though I haven't cut a purchase order. But at least they know the paper that we want to use, they're going to reserve it, and they're going to get it at the lesser price.
So you mentioned paperweight. For our listeners who may not be as in the know on production as you, like, what does that mean?
So basically, the paperweight is, how do I describe it? The way the paper will feel. You don't want it to be too thin that you can see right through it, or that it feels like a newspaper. So we use 115 GSM, which is equivalent to an 80-pound stock in the United States.
So basically a higher number is thicker paper.
Exactly.
It's like a shorthand for this.
Exactly, yes.
So we've mostly been talking about normal books.
Okay.
Some books have to get printed or turned around faster than normal for any number of reasons.
Okay.
How does that change things on your end? Obviously not ideal.
Right. I generally go to the printer and ask for a drop-dead schedule. When is the last date that I can get you files and you can still meet this date? And we work from there. You know, on a typical book for first pass, this is the first time we're seeing proofs, we might have 2 weeks. If a job is a rush, we might have 2 days. The later we are, or the tighter the schedule, the less time people have to review the proofs, which obviously can lead to mistakes and issues, but it's done all the time. And if we need the books right away, that's one of the ways that we cut down, is really in the proofing stage. And if it is just completely impossible to print in China, then we look at domestic costs.
So, like, because I get the sense that, like, there can sometimes be this feeling among authors. They're like, oh, this date that they're giving me is like a fake date. I know that I had my friend who got pneumonia and had to turn their book in 2 months late, and it was fine. But, like, if your book's going to the printer 2 months later, like, that's less time for proofs and less time to fix problems. And maybe if it prints too dark or too light or something, you can't necessarily fix it. Or, like, there's problems that come up because of that. Like, you're not just like, no, we just want to be able to drink margaritas and relax while we're doing this.
I think there's definitely an introduction for error there, because you still need the group to look at it. Design still needs to look at it. Editorial needs to look at it. Managing ed needs to go out to a reader, and you're cutting down on everyone's time, so everyone is rushing. You really can have errors if that happens. Sometimes it can't be helped, but it really isn't the ideal situation. And when you have a list of 20 books, you want them to be spaced out a little bit, because if they're all on that schedule, that's when it can get really difficult.
You're a human person, and you have only so many hours in the day
Exactly.
to look at books.
Yeah, I mean, 1 or 2 rushes is typical. To have half your list be a rush is really hard, but if everything is a rush, and I have worked at publishers where that's how they work. That's just the culture, that you're going to print fast and furious and give your book like the 10 minutes and keep moving. And I personally don't think that's the best way to work.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. You can only do that for so long. I feel like here at Macmillan, we work really hard to try to keep things on schedule. Obviously, that doesn't always happen, but I think everybody's very mindful, and we really try to plan ahead. We have a great team.
We keep hammering this point in the podcast, but I'm going to be this asshole yet again. That this is why, if you're having a problem with drawing your book, you really want to say as early as possible, I think I'm going to have a problem, and not wait until your deadline to tell people that you're going to be a couple months late. Because if somebody tells you 6 months out that the book might be late, that's very different. You have a lot, I assume you have more scope for...
Yeah, 6 months out from the due date
Yeah,
of
exactly,
the book rather than the publication date.
Yes, I'm sorry,
of
to
the
be
book.
clear.
Exactly, because we can all wait. We can be prepared for when that file is going to get here, that job is going to get here. If we need to send it out, we can have people set up to read it at that time. I can write ahead to the prep house and say, I know this is unusual. I need you to prep this job in a week rather than what is usually 2 weeks. I will prepare a schedule, email everybody that's part of that team so that they know that when this book comes, they kind of have to drop everything and work on this book.
Yeah, and it's not just dropping everything on the publisher end, it's also the author who is then going to have to drop everything when they get the proofs back and review them, which
Right.
is a problem if
It's
they
not
are
fun.
like, for example, like going to visit their grandmother for her birthday for 2 days and then get back home and are like, these proofs were due yesterday. They arrived the day that I left. Oh no, I have missed this date. And a problem for the printer, I'm sure too, if they're like, we thought we were going to be printing 5 books this week, but in fact 10 books have come in and we don't actually have the allocated like printing machine time for all of these books, so we're going to have to make some of them printed later.
Right. It seems that authors and illustrators are traveling a lot lately. It's like every time something's late, they're out of the country. So things like that do happen. So we do need to plan exactly, because once the proofs come to us, they're reviewing them at the same time.
Yeah.
So everybody just has to be prepared. So if we know something's going to be late, that really is what we do. We create a drop-dead schedule so that everybody knows when this is coming and they can work around that.
I'm sorry, I get very emotional about like the collaborative, the team coming together to get this fucking book out the door. Anyway.
So you mentioned that sometimes for advances, you'll air freight them to the U.S. from China.
And to be clear, advances you mean like early copies
Early
of the book,
copies
not
of
your
the
advance
book.
that you're getting paid.
Yes. Advance printed final copies of the book. You'll air freight them to the U.S. via an airplane sort of situation rather than putting them on a cargo ship. Can you talk about why that is not practical for the entire quantity of books that goes on the cargo ship?
Sure. So to air freight a book, obviously it depends on the weight and the page count and what.
Yeah,
what
graphic
the full-
novels are pretty heavy, though.
They're pretty heavy.
Oh, that is actually an interesting fact that I don't know if we've talked about, how like graphic novels are kind of heavier than most other kinds of books.
Right.
True
So
facts.
this is true. The trim sizes are generally smaller than our picture books, but they're much heavier. Obviously, a hardcover is heavier than a paperback. We recently had a gigantic book. It was On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden, which is a monster. It's just a gigantic book, very heavy. If we wanted to air freight copies of On a Sunbeam, it probably would have been between $5 and $6 a copy,
Jesus.
because they do need to be put on an airplane.
And that's not like the printing cost.
Right, that's on top of the printing cost.
So that's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, and there are also, I don't know what the number is, but I believe there is a limit to how many books you can actually put on an airplane. And what happens is, so there's the term next day air. So if we order a certain number of books that are advances, if there's something like 90 copies, those will come next day. But if you're ordering a much larger number, and actually we did do it once. We ordered, I think it was like 75,000 copies of books that were air freighted, because it was actually cheaper to print in China and air freight them than it was to print them
Oh
domestically.
my God.
And
this is so painful. I'm sure that you don't want to get into the specifics of the shit show that led to that, but oh my fucking God.
Well,
that's
And
terrifying.
was it just one plane, or did you have to like organize a fleet of planes to come to you?
so I have to say that I don't know the exact way it was done. It was handled by our operations manager. But I do know that something like that, even though they're being air freighted, it's not next day. It's usually need to allow like a week for that. And I don't know if there are just certain planes that do that or how it works. But that particular book had a metallic stock jacket, which would be very expensive to print domestically. So that's why it was worth it to print it overseas and air freight it. And we just ran out of stock. We needed books as soon as possible.
Publishing is so terrifying.
And while we're talking about advanced final printed copies, what about galleys? Because that's another advanced form of book
Are you
that
guys
people see.
also responsible for galleys and arcs and things like that?
Yes, we are. So galleys are printed at a very early stage, usually the first pass, sometimes not even colored in.
So it's not like in this process of sending the mechanical to the printer, they also produce a galley. It's kind of before that stage.
Absolutely, yes. So we have particular dates that we want to hit so that our sales reps can get the books out and promote them and make sure that we have nice orders when the bulk actually ships. So to hit those dates, we're basically looking at where we are at that stage. And right now we're about to hit many galleys. One of the things that we're going to be doing going forward is printing galleys for all of our first second books, which can be very expensive because those things are done domestically. And one of the options that we've done in the past is to print like a signature in color and the balance in one color. That's one of the options. We've looked at printing completely in 4-color. So these are different selling materials that we have, but they typically print in 2 weeks, which is anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. So they're not going to have the quality that the finished book has. They're typically not going to be on the same paper. They're going to look like a paperback, which might not be the final format of the book, but it is a good selling material to get the audience to see what the finished book is going to be.
And you print those in the U.S. as well.
Those are printed domestically. Yeah. They're still very expensive.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the reason they are so expensive is because it's a smaller run.
I know it varies enormously from book to book, but like what's an average per unit cost for a finished printed in China, I'm going to sell this in a bookstore book versus like that same book as an arc or a galley?
You could just say like more or
ballpark.
less.
Yeah.
Okay. I will give you, right now I'm doing it's not a graphic novel though. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
It's more about the giant difference.
Okay. So I am working on it's a 128-page book that's pretty large trim size. And we're doing only 213 galleys. Those galleys are each $12.
Oh my God.
The finished book, we don't have a final run yet, but typically a first printing will be anywhere between 7,500 to 10,000 copies. That book will probably manufacture at about $2.
Yeah, that's about what I would thought. Yeah.
It's a tremendous difference.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous difference. With the graphic novel galleys, it does depend on whether we decide to do a complete 4-color galley or if we're going to just give the reader a little taste of it with the 4-color signature and then the rest 1 color. That makes a big difference. It really depends on the page count, what the cost is going to be. But there is a huge savings to print a higher quantity. That's really, if you're printing anything under 3,000 copies, you're going to pay a lot of money. You want to keep the quantities high.
So actually, that reminds me of another question, which, I mean, I know a lot of people are involved in the decision, but you're obviously having to execute on this. Like, when are you getting your actual order for, like, how many copies of this book are going to get printed? Like, how early in the process is that decision getting made? Because obviously, when you're pretty early on, you have, like, a kind of vague idea, but,
Sure.
like, when is it that you're actually sitting down and talking to the people and be like, all right, first printing is going to be X number of copies?
Right.
And how much are you like, you say that you want 20,000 of this, but actually if we order 25, then the per unit cost drops down by 2 cents and the costs kind of equal out.
So projections are done pretty early on. We have what's called catalog pricing meeting. We bring the title with all the specs and the costing, and we present it to the publisher. The editors are there. Sales, I think there are some salespeople there. And at that point, we're just looking to see what it's going to cost us later on. 3 months before the books ship is when we decide on a final quantity.
And ship, in this case, which version of ship do you mean? Like, as in, you're sending the book to the printer, or the printer's sending it to you? Like,
when the printer is getting ready to send the finished books on that boat and off to our warehouse.
Okay, 3 months before the printer's putting the books on the boat is when you're deciding how many books are getting printed.
Yes, so that would be anywhere between 5 and 6 months before the books go on sale. Because at that point, we have 3 months before the books are finished, and they go off on the boat, they hit the warehouse, they release, they go on sale. So it's usually about 6 months in advance. And at that point, there is a meeting where important people go and decide how many books, and they're basing those numbers on the interest that has come from Barnes & Noble, the interest that has come from Amazon or whoever we sell to. And I generally present 3 quantities. One of them is a quantity I've been given and said, this is most likely at this point what we're going to print. And there will be 2 other quantities that will have come earlier on. And they will look at those quantities and decide what is the best quantity to print so that we can get our sales out to whoever wants to buy them, but also so that we don't have a large number sitting in the warehouse.
Yeah.
Because warehousing costs are a big concern for supply chain. They want to print the right amount, but they don't want a ton sitting in the warehouse that we're paying for. They want to be able to order a reprint rather than have them sit.
So, like, I assume that you're kind of aiming for like a sweet spot between, we don't want to sell out of this book so quickly that people can't buy it,
Right.
like a week after it comes out. But
Right.
we also don't want to pay for warehousing for the next year.
Exactly.
So are you thinking like your first printing is going to be enough stock to sell for a year or for a month, or like what's that kind of time estimate?
In your ideal world.
Right. In my ideal world, I would say 9 months, because you don't want to run out of books when it's just been released. You don't want to run out when people really want that book.
And also, if you're sending a book to the printer and it takes them 12 weeks to get you copies to put back on sale, that means if you publish it and something really exciting happens on the first day, people buy all the books, you won't have any more stock for 3 months if you go on a kind of a typical schedule without kind of air freighting the 75,000 copies on a cargo plane.
Right. Exactly. And that just recently happened. So we ordered a book from China. It released at the end of June, and we had a Barnes & Noble edition for it. We had a signed edition. We had the main edition. And we just didn't have enough books. So we are printing domestically. That is a case where we look at the China costs and the China schedule, and we know, we can forecast that we're not going to have books in the warehouse. So at that point, we do go to a domestic printer. What happens, unfortunately, though, is at this time of year, the domestic printers get pretty busy. Believe it or not, they're printing for Christmas.
And that was the thing. I know Gina and we were talking about this before we started recording. Like, how much are you having to think about what's going on in the various countries that you're printing in terms of like when you're scheduling things? Because obviously, like America, we have times when basically nobody's working, and I assume in China they also have times when basically nobody's working. Like, are you keeping track of that as you're making your decisions?
And also times when it's like all of the Christmas books are reprinting, or all of the Halloween books are reprinting, or all the Easter books are reprinting, or all the summer reading books are reprinting.
Yeah, I guess it's extremes in either direction.
Yeah, we really have to think about that, especially Chinese New Year. Chinese New Year, the plants typically close anywhere from a week to 2 weeks, but before the plants are closed, many of the workers, just like we are here around the holidays in December, we start to head out. There's like an exodus out of the company, and by the last day, there's like no one left. And that basically is what happens in China. So we really do plan for that time, and it's different every year. So we really have to pay attention to when is Chinese New Year next year. It can be anywhere from middle of January to middle of February. And that also coincides with the time that we're out at the end of December. So those are 2 weeks that are pretty close together that we really need to plan for. We know that if something doesn't get out by, let's say, December 18th, it's unlikely that it's going to get out that year because so many people start to go home for the holidays. We can't get it out. And then we're not going to see anything until the new year anyway. And at that point, when we come back and we're kind of like, okay, we've had our time off, now our CSRs in China are saying, get me those files now because we're not going to be here for much longer before we leave for Chinese
So
New
what
Year.
you don't want is to basically have 2 weeks of nobody doing anything in the U.S.
Right.
Followed immediately by 2 weeks. Like you don't want to lose a
Right.
month basically
Right.
because of not having planned.
Right. So when I create my schedules, I want as many mechanicals out either for first pass or for corrections right before we leave for the holidays so that when we come back,
You can send them right back out again.
we're getting them now from our main prep houses in Canada. They work that week and we're getting the proofs in and we're routing them. So we basically haven't lost any time. That is the ideal way to schedule it. I try.
I'm glad we got into this because I think there's this perception that it literally is just like people just don't want to deal with things over the holiday. Like there are also, I mean, there's more concerns than just individual people's schedules about these things. It's interesting to remember how complicated this system is.
Yeah, and Christmas books that are printed in China are actually printed in the beginning of the summer, actually early June, so
Yeah.
really end of spring. And right now is when the domestic printers are rushing because Christmas books are out on displays like in October. So they need to hit the warehouse or wherever store they're going to be displayed like at the end of September.
And for the context, we're recording this episode in the second week of August.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you go to our printer this week, it will be full of copies of The Christmas Carol.
Yes.
So we've kind of touched on this, but I know that we also wanted to ask.
Wait, sorry, before you do that,
please.
you use the abbreviation CSR.
Okay, customer service representative.
Okay, back to it.
Excellent. So you talked a little bit about reprints. How does that work on your end? Because obviously it isn't just, you don't just push a button on your computer that says reprint this book. And you mentioned that sometimes you have to print it at a different printer or in a different country, but like what other kinds of things are you worrying about when it comes to reprinting books?
And like, how are you involved with the decision to reprint the book? Like, are you the person who is like, hello, we have no stock on this book, it must be reprinted?
I generally am not. So we have supply chain who is watching closely how many books we still have in the warehouse, what the sales have been, so they can project when we're going to be out of stock.
And that's a whole department of people who works at the company.
Right. So they have a weekly meeting, so they really are watching these numbers closely. And they can decide on a weekly basis. What they will do is, as they see that books are selling out, they will bring them to this meeting. We do have a separate reprint manager that handles children's reprints. And typically, if it's a straightforward reprint, she will handle that. She will go back to the original vendor and order a reprint. Reprints typically take 3 to 4 weeks. So they're done pretty quickly. That doesn't include shipping time. If it's a little bit more complicated, where we are moving the job to the US, even though it's a reprint for us, it's still a first printing for that domestic printer. So the original production manager will handle that. So whenever something moves domestically, I will work on it, even though it is a reprint. And generally, reprints are just always a rush because they are needed very quickly to make sure that we don't run out of stock.
So what about when you're reprinting the book and correcting errors? How does that process work? And how does it work from the point where errors get communicated with you?
The errors generally go through the managing editorial group, and they keep a list of what the errors are, what corrections need to be made.
Like on page 54, this word was spelled incorrectly, or
Right.
the blacks fell off of
Exactly.
this page, or something like that.
If it's a color correction, generally what I will do is order that original file from our prep house, and our designer will fix the file. We will return it back to the prep house and say, this is what it should be, so that we know when it reprints, that file is ready to go. That's really the best way to be prepared at all times, because, like I said, the reprints are needed quickly.
So what happens when there's not just like on page 54, this word is spelled incorrectly, or a tail fell off this word balloon or something like that, but like I got these final books in and there is something seriously wrong. Like they have printed the book at 150 DPI, or like the covers are on upside down or something like that. Obviously, that's not ideal.
Right.
Probably doesn't happen very often also.
It happens sometimes. We've had pagination issues where, for whatever reason, a signature was placed incorrectly, and now the pagination is wrong. And obviously, you can't read a book that
is out of order.
Things like that will happen. Many times, it depends on sometimes when the signatures are gathered at the printer, they will be inserted incorrectly, or they will be placed incorrectly. It's generally, at least in my experience, not been the bulk. It's usually a handful that will happen between signatures, or it's not generally the full run. I mean, obviously that does happen where if there's something like with a resolution, that's obviously going to be the whole book. If there's smearing, that can be something that might not happen throughout. It might be that the ink didn't dry, and there are a couple that
at the beginning of the print
exactly
run,
during the make ready. So the make ready is as the printing machines are warming up, and they're getting up to speed on color. They're getting up to speed on registration. At that point, a lot of mistakes can happen, and generally the printer will take those copies and set those aside. Those should not make it out into the population, but sometimes they do. Sometimes they are advances because the printer is trying to get the advances out to us for approval before they ship out the bulk. For the most part, my experience has been that we've not had those kind of mistakes where something is upside down. It happens, though. I know it happens. Actually, one of my coworkers recently had a book cased in upside down. Because of the design, it was forgiving, but what it meant was that the wording on the spine was backwards. We did go ahead with it because, like I said, it was forgiving. The way that it was designed, you'd have to see it. We could get away with it, and the printer was confused. So it wasn't a matter of, oh, we just did that with a few of them. We're like, no, we did that with all of them. They all ship that way.
So, I mean, what percentage typically of a given print run are you just going to assume are going to have something wrong with them for one reason or another? Like, there's obviously like a certain amount of like wiggle room for when you're printing tens of thousands of books. Of those tens of thousands, how many typically are just like accepted? These are just going to be messed up for whatever reason.
And of course, like it would be so great if every book was 100% perfect. But if you're ordering some thousands of copies of something, of course, there's going to be.
You know, I think that we generally don't allow for any kind of errors like that. If there is a concern, what we will do, there have been times that we found mistakes. We will have a warehouse spot check, and what they will do is go to a particular pallet and go through a couple of cartons on that pallet. If they find the issue, then that requires a more extensive investigation. But if they don't find any issues, we're going to assume that the rest of them are okay.
Yeah.
And if we want a more extensive investigation of the books, then we take it from there.
So you're talking about like a negligible number of copies are going to randomly be screwed up, but it's not like you're having. Yeah.
And it really does depend on the problem. Like if there is a resolution problem, you know that's going to be on every single book. But for example, I had a book that had die cuts, and some of the die cuts didn't actually pop out. So the piece of paper that should have been die cut, there was the outline, but they didn't pop out. When we did the investigation, we found that it was a small number, but it was so critical for a book like that. So it doesn't even matter if it's just a few.
I love that there's like book detectives. This is really good.
Well, the warehouse will typically do just a couple because it's expensive to go to open every carton. But there are actual companies that we will ship the books out, and they will do that kind of very thorough investigation.
So it's like an audit, basically, of your print run.
Yes, and it's a very expensive process because the books are printed in China. We don't pay that much money, but now you're paying for U.S. workers to go through these books. It's going to really...
You have to ship them to them. You have to ship them back to the warehouse.
Yes. And also the books have now been handled.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not an ideal setting at all. There have been times that the China printer will say, don't do that. We're going to just reprint them. We're just going to reprint them and send them to you.
I was going to say, sometimes it must be cheaper to just redo the run than to have to comb through like 30,000 books or something.
Exactly, because they also don't have a partnership with anyone in the United States that can do that sort of work. So they're going to pay a lot of money. Obviously, we're going to charge them back for this. So many
It's
times...
excellent that you're like, printers, you are responsible and must pay for this.
Yeah.
Haha.
Yeah. So typically it may be cheaper for them to just reprint.
I've definitely had a couple of times where friends' books have gotten screwed up, and there's this moment of like, did we fuck this up or did the printer fuck this up? And then when the printer, yes, oh, thank God the printer fucked this up. They have to pay for it. There's like that tension of, did we miss this somehow? That like the cover was upside down or that...
I understand because I see things and I'm like, did I miss this somehow? And I'm really grateful when I find out it's not me. It wasn't me.
So how much are you thinking about sustainability when you're printing? Is like the environment kind of coming into the equation at all?
It is. So we print on, we had talked about paperweight before, and we print on 115 GSM. We had previously printed on 128 GSM. And I admit it is a nice thicker sheet. So I liked it. But from a sustainability point of view, we can now, printing on a 115 GSM stock, now we can fit more books into a carton. We can ship less cartons. So from that point of view, our carbon footprint is not as large as it would have otherwise been if we had kept on a 128. We print all of our books on environmentally friendly paper. It's not recycled paper, but it is paper that is coming from trees that, or forests that are
New growth
replanted.
forests.
Right, exactly. So in that regard, we are very mindful, and our printers are also.
That's great.
So, I mean, this is a very specialized and very cool job that you have.
Thank you.
If somebody, well, I mean, somebody's listening to this and they're like, I'm so excited by these problems and this seems like such an interest. I mean, I'm not kidding. Like,
Yeah.
it's a really cool, there's a lot of interesting problem solving that you guys are doing. So somebody's thinking like that ultimately they'd like to have your kind of job. Like, what's the path to working in production the way in which you do?
Well, I have a degree in design, so I sort of stumbled on it. One of my first jobs, I worked for the sweepstakes company with Ed McMahon. I don't know if you guys
Oh,
may
yeah.
be too young to remember that.
We're right in the sweet spot of that one.
Okay, so I worked for that company. That was my first job out of college, and I was a design assistant, and we scanned a lot of photos because that company, what they sold, it was publishing, but it was magazines and it was direct mail. And there were a lot of images that needed to be scanned, and I worked very closely with production because I would have these images that needed to be either scanned or cleaned up, and that would go through production. I worked with them, and I learned a lot about what they did. And we went on a couple of printing plant tours, which were incredibly interesting. And with every job after that, I just kind of got pushed a little bit closer into, because design and production are very closely related. And it is important in production to have, not that it's important, I find it to be a benefit to have some design knowledge. So that if you can talk terminology when it comes to files and to the different programs, it is helpful. And that's where I started, and I just ended up moving closer and closer into production. I know that there are, I think NYU has a production master's program. So there are programs like that. I don't know that other than, I think everybody I've ever worked with has just sort of stumbled on production. And sometimes you just worked in printing and you ended up on the production side of things. because it is very closely related to other areas in publishing, such as design or printing.
Are there characteristics that you look for when you're hiring production apprentices?
Yeah, and like what are the junior people in your department?
We've had people that have come from stores, like from retail, from Barnes & Noble. We've had people that have worked in like a college magazine or that kind of background. You know, we've been very lucky. My boss does the hiring. I actually don't, but if he asks for some input, which he generally does from the rest of the department, it's really more about somebody that is open to like fresh ideas and being able to have an enthusiasm for the printed book, which we've been lucky enough to find.
It sounds like also detail-oriented is probably good, and a good communicator.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Like how many people are in your department?
We are, I think we're 8.
And that's for all of Macmillan Children's.
That's for all of Macmillan
Who does about 650 books a year.
Right. And then we have the adult folks that are upstairs, and they're a small army. They're probably like, I don't know, maybe 15 people. But yeah, it's a fun career. It's very gratifying to go into a bookstore and see a book that you worked on, to see it displayed, to see that it really looks good, to see somebody on the subway reading a book that you worked on. And even when I get printed materials in the mail, I pick it up and I look at the printing and the quality and the inks and how everything just, the different effects. And I'm really impressed sometimes by some of the advertising. Like, for example, American Express, if you get like their credit card offers, their envelopes are a soft touch matte and they have foil on them. And I look at all these effects and I'm like, wow, they really spent a lot of money here.
Well, they have like a very specific customer that they're looking for.
Yeah. I don't know why I'm getting these, but because I really don't have the money to be getting these, but I do.
Well, at least you're appreciating them.
Yes.
They just want to be appreciated like anybody else.
I really do. I'm impressed by their packaging.
God, if only you could like know who's responsible for doing that and write them an email. That'd be like the best email they got that month.
Right.
Like, by the way, the paper stock you picked out for this envelope was like super good.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up, is there anything else about the production process, about your job that you want to talk about that we skipped over?
I just hope that it continues. I think for a while we were really worried about ebooks.
Yeah.
But I think that's gone away. And it's really nice when I see younger people reading physical books, because for a while we thought, okay, there's going to be a transition here where people are going to stop reading physical books. But I'm happy that that isn't going away, because you can't get that, the beautiful design. You can't get the texture of the paper. You can't get how it feels in your hand, the weight of the book in an ebook. So that's the one thing that I hope will always continue.
If anything, I feel like your job is more important now than it ever has been, because the book as an object is such a thing that people are thinking about now. Like, it isn't just like, I'm going to buy this book because I want to read it. It's, I'm choosing to buy the paper version of this book because I want to have this beautiful object. And so the quality of the printing, like, normal people talk a lot more about spot gloss than they used to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's
Right.
like, it's like, or French flaps or whatever. Like, I think that people actually really care about that stuff. The kinds of people who are going to buy books are more likely to notice and appreciate the decisions that you're kind of help making for it to look really beautiful.
Okay, so if people want to learn more about you and what you're doing, or about For a Second, is there a good place to find you online?
I am a rare person that is not on social media at all. It's probably not a good answer.
So
But
if somebody has a desperate question for you, they should email us and we'll forward it on to you, basically.
that sounds good.
Yes, or they can check in with For a Second on social too.
That's
I'm
true.
sure.
Just at For a Second, be like, go knock on her door.
And if you find me, I'll be really impressed, because at that point they've gone through a lot of trouble.
Okay, well, Alexa, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you,
This
guys.
was great.
I apologize in advance if somebody does actually end up knocking on your door in the middle of the afternoon because of this podcast episode.
Thanks Thanks, everyone, for listening to Graphic Novel TK. Our next episode is going to be about cover design, and we're super excited to be talking about that part of the book creation process. How does it work? How do covers get made? And why is everyone so crazy about making sure that they're just perfect?
In other words, why did you have to redraw your cover 3 times? We're going to tell you all about that.
For an hour.
Graphic Novel TK is co-produced by Gina Gagliano and Allison Wilbus and is brought to you by The Beat. You can find our show notes along with other comics news and podcasts at comicsbeat.com. Our podcast graphics were created by Shivana Sokdeo. Our theme music is by Poddington Bear. You can follow us on Twitter at Graphic Novel TK or email us at graphicnoveltk@gmail.com. Do you have like a checklist you're going through when Gina's making a face at me?
It was just a normal face.
Oh, okay.